Hurricane Milton is a catastrophic Category 5 hurricane expected to bring horrible impacts to the west coast of Florida. I'm Mike Naso with this 11 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 p.m. Central Time update on the hurricane. We have a lot to cover tonight, so let's get right to it. Here's the latest on Hurricane Milton as of 11 p.m. from the National Hurricane Center. It's at 21.8 north, 89.9 west. That puts it only 35 miles off the coastline of the Yucatan Peninsula. It's very close. Winds are 165 miles per hour. It's a catastrophic Category 5 hurricane, record-breaking in many ways, and it had been up to 175. It's actually fluctuating, but still Category 5, and the pressure 914 millibars. By comparison, when Hurricane Andrew hit Homestead back in 1992, that was 922 millibars. This is currently 914 millibars. It's moving faster now, 9 miles per hour towards the east. That should eventually become east-northeast and then northeast through time, bringing the hurricane ashore somewhere in the general vicinity of Tampa Bay, but it could be further north or further south. Anybody in that cone come Wednesday night, early Thursday, needs to be ready for a major hurricane. It almost certainly won't be a Category 5, but it could be a Category 4 and likely a Category 3, which is a very major hurricane, and it'll be a lot larger spatially than it is now. We do have watches and warnings. We have a hurricane warning, obviously, for the north coast of the Yucatan Peninsula, and we now have a hurricane warning from Bonita Beach, Florida to Suwannee River, and that includes downtown Tampa, Florida. So the wind field now is clipping the Yucatan, hurricane force winds just offshore. The major hurricane force winds right around the eye, that eye shrunk to about 3 to 4 miles wide. The aircraft recon flying around kept missing it. It was so small. Now here's a look at that on the radar. This is from Brian McNulty's radar page. And watch how the hurricane, that eye became very well defined, Category 5, and then it slowly starts to deteriorate right there towards the end. That's what we call an eye wall replacement cycle. That's where this eye strengthens and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, and then a new, larger outer eye kind of takes shape. And that's what we're seeing happen now. Now, the good news is when that occurs, the system weakens, which is why it's weakening right now, even though it's still a Category 5. The bad news is it'll get larger in size as the fat, newer, rounder eye takes shape. Nevertheless, notice the track. It was a little southeast, then east, and we kind of had wobbles here to the north, and then it kind of stopped and wobbled to the south again, and now it's sitting right off the coastline there of the Yucatan Peninsula. Very, very close. Here's the infrared satellite, and that shows you even better how the little eye, look at how tiny it became, and now we have a bigger eye taking shape, and that will cause the system to become larger and a little bit weaker as it moves north of the Yucatan, and then eventually gets swept up towards the southwest and western coastline of Florida. There's another look, and wow, it is really close to the Yucatan. Again, the devastating Category 5 winds would be right in that area I circled, right in there. Now, hurricane force winds are a little further out, tropical storm force winds, and so it is clipping the Yucatan. Very nasty conditions for areas there. Merida, Progreso on the north coast of the Yucatan Peninsula, taking a fierce battering from the hurricane tonight. Now, the computer models, these are the Europeans. They take it north of the Yucatan, and they bring it ashore in Florida somewhere between Clearwater and Sanibel Island. Most of them appear to be in the Tampa, St. Petersburg area, maybe through Sarasota and Venice. But again, it's still too early to pinpoint a precise, exact landfall location. The GFS, pretty much the same. They take it just north near Clearwater, all the way down here, more near Charlotte Harbor, not as far south as Sanibel, but somewhere generally Tampa Bay and maybe Sarasota. So we could be looking at a direct hit for Tampa Bay, which hasn't happened in about 103 years. So nobody living there has ever experienced anything like a direct hit of a Category 3, 4, or 5 hurricane. And to the south, you would have impacts from the onshore flow of the storm surge. It's going to be really bad, guys. Look at this water rise potential. We're looking at 10, 12, 15 feet, maybe higher, anywhere where you see these reds. That's Longboat Key, Siesta Key, Bradenton Beach, St. Petersburg, areas there of Tampa Bay, right in there with the track of the hurricane. That would just be devastating. If we zoom in even further here, it shows you Anna Maria Island. That could be underwater. That could be submerged. St. Petersburg, St. Pete Beach, Madeira Beach, North Reddington Beach, Treasure Island. You guys could all be in for some disastrous high water storm surge. And that's why everybody needs to listen to local officials. Again, 10 to 15 feet near Tampa Bay. Charlotte Harbor, not much better, 6 to 10 feet. During Hurricane Helene, Tampa Bay got up to maybe 6 feet of surge, Clearwater 7 feet. Look at now, 10 to 15. So take as nasty as Helene was times 2. That's the type of water rise you could see. To say nothing of further down, 6 to 10 feet from areas there of Charlotte Harbor down to Bonita Beach. That includes Sanibel Island, Fort Myers. You guys are going to have the type of storm surge or higher that they saw near Clearwater with Helene. So it's going to be bad news all around. Now, from the National Weather Service office in Tampa Bay, this was as of 5 p.m., but it's not much different. The water level storm surge threats they use, 1, 2, 3, and 4, that whole area there, straight through Clearwater, St. Pete, Tampa, all the way down to Sanibel, level 4. And that means you could have water reaching several miles inland, many large sections of nearshore roads washed out, low-lying escape routes severely flooded, surge breaching dunes and seawalls, structural damage to shoreline buildings, several washing into the sea, extensive damage to marinas, docks, piers, numerous small craft broken away, lifted on shore, and stranded. And then to the south here, near areas of Marco Island, you could have a high impact, severe beach erosion, breaching of dunes, almost as bad. So what that means is just very, very bad situations for the west coast of Florida. Now, a reminder, there are mass evacuations taking place. Follow your local officials and what they're saying about evacuating. If your area is at risk of flooding, shut off water, gas, electricity before leaving. Unplug electric equipment, TVs, small appliances. Take your pets with you. Do you know how many pets die in hurricanes nobody talks about? People leave dogs chained up and the storm surge comes in, and there's nothing you could do about it. Listen to a battery-powered radio. Call family and friends. Tell them where you're going. That way they don't think you're gone and swept away. Secure your home, and check on any neighbors who may need a ride to get out of Dodge, okay? And there's the information in Spanish. Now, Hurricane Milton reached a peak intensity of 897 millibars for pressure. Now, to try and give you some comparison, 997 millibars, 100 millibars higher, would be a tropical storm. So this was a very intense weather system, and it was the most intense pressure, the lowest pressure in the Atlantic since Hurricane Wilma in 2005. And to put that in some perspective, these are the most intense low pressures in the Atlantic that we have in recorded history, going back about 150, 160 years. And Milton ranks number 5. We still had Rita, 1935, Gilbert, and Wilma that all ranked higher than that. But there's a lot of what I'd call alarmism about this hurricane. A lot of people have said some things that are incorrect. They've said it, you don't get hurricanes developing in the Gulf of Mexico. That's not true. In 1848, before we even kept records, we do have a record of this storm, one developed very close to where Milton developed. And that was in September of 1848. And it came up and it slammed directly into the Tampa Bay area. They called it the Gale of 1848. It changed the face of the peninsula coastline and Keys. It was devastating. Look at this from October 23, 1848. On the 25th of September, commenced winds southeast, continued, unprecedented violence until 6 p.m., during which time it hauled round from southeast to northwest. What does that sound like? It's a hurricane. The water rose 10 feet above high water mark or more. Buildings were driven from their places, crushing everything. That was a hurricane. It was a major hurricane near Tampa Bay, developed right where Milton did. That was in 1848. This one was in 1921. That was the most recent major hurricane to directly hit Tampa. Came out of the Caribbean, clipped western Cuba, slammed right in and crossed the peninsula. How bad was this? Tampa was a city of ruins. October 1921. Warren Harding was the president. Nobody living in Tampa has ever had a direct hit, but that doesn't mean it hasn't happened before. I am sick and tired of people trying to understand why are hurricanes so bad. I'm going back now 41 years. Hurricane Alicia, 1983, hit Houston, Texas. The next year, 1984, Hurricane Diana hit the Outer Banks and the North Carolina coastline south of there near Wilmington. 1985, Hurricane Elena hit the Florida Panhandle. Then Hurricane Gloria up the East Coast. $900 million in damage. 1986 was a slow year. Still had a hurricane hit Texas. Bonnie, $42 million damage. 1987, Hurricane Emily hit the Hispaniola Dominican Republic, Category 3. 1988, Hurricane Gilbert, the strongest hurricane at the time, devastated Mexico as a Cat 5. Later that year, Hurricane Joan killed hundreds of people in Central America as a Category 4. The next year, Hurricane Hugo, Puerto Rico, the islands, South Carolina. Remember Hurricane Hugo? A beast, 1989. Look what it did to South Carolina. 1990 was uneventful. Still had Hurricane Diana kill 139 people in Mexico. Hurricane Klaus. Nobody talks about that, but the rainfall in Martinique, 1,500 people were left homeless. 1990. 1991, Hurricane Bob. It impacted Kennebunkport, Maine. Kennebunkport. You know who was up there? President Bush. The President of the United States was impacted November 2nd, 1991. Hurricane Bob. Can you imagine if that happened today? They'd act like it never happened before. 1991, after Bob, Hurricane Grace merged with another weather system, created the perfect storm. You ever heard of that? 1992, you remember Hurricane Andrew. This is what it did to Southeast Florida. Now, I'm going to stop there because I just went from 1983, 84, 85, 86. Every single year there are hurricanes, some worse than others. It's like baseball. You know, one guy, Milton, might hit the most home runs in any season of any player in the history of Major League Baseball. But it broke a record of something else, and then there'll be something in the future that breaks that record. It happens. It's weather. Hurricane Milton is a Category 5 hurricane that has developed over very warm waters, and it's going to be a very major hurricane for the west coast of Florida, just like in 1921 and just like in 1846. 1840s, 1920s, 2020s. It could happen again next year. It could happen again in 50 years. The point is, these events happen, and all you can do is have really good beachfront insurance and evacuate when told to do so. And that's my vent. The key messages for Hurricane Milton as you go to sleep this Monday night: damaging hurricane force winds and a life-threatening storm surge with destructive waves expected along the north coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. Remember, it's only a few miles offshore. Number 2, it is expected to grow in size and remain an extremely dangerous hurricane as it approaches the west coast of Florida on Wednesday, at least a Category 3. A large area of destructive storm surge will occur along portions of the west coast of Florida on Wednesday. This is an extremely life-threatening situation, and residents in those areas should follow advice given by local officials and evacuate immediately if you're told to do so. Number 3, potentially devastating winds are expected along the west coast of Florida. We do have a hurricane warning. Milton is forecast to remain a hurricane as it crosses the Florida Peninsula. And that's why we have the hurricane watch on the east coast too. And hurricane force winds, especially in gusts, are expected to spread inland. Preparations to protect life and property in the warning area should be complete by tomorrow night, Tuesday night, because tropical storm conditions are going to happen in advance of the storm by early Wednesday. Finally, areas of heavy rainfall will continue to impact Florida ahead of Milton, and then heavy rainfall directly associated with the system expected tomorrow night through Thursday. Again, considerable flash urban and aerial flooding is likely. This is a very, very serious hurricane. We still have a day or two before landfall to watch it, so this is crunch time. If you're told to evacuate, please do so. So I know this was a pretty long update, but this is a very powerful and dangerous hurricane taking aim at Florida. I'm Mike Naso, and I'll talk to you next time with more on Milton.